Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. On this week's episode, Doreen Corridan and Stuart assess the success of the early weeks of the breeding season and give tips and advice for management of AI and bull usage to ensure high pregnancy rates throughout.
To date, Emma, it has been a very good season, but the one thing we have to remember is we're still only in the end of February calving. Maiden heifers, we definitely have seen an increase in synchronisation this year and an increase in sex semen in maidens, and probably overall seen an increase in AI in maidens. So the one thing I would be concerned about is that with these maiden heifers, we actually do pick up the repeats, because if we've used sex semen, we're going to end up with 10% probably less than conventional. So we'll have more empty heifers. Also, with the increase in synchronisation, it's imperative that the repeats are actually picked up, because there would have big concerns about synchronisation programs and bulls that do not know how to mate being left off with bunches of heifers, and then we're losing 3 weeks and probably the benefit that we actually got initially from the synchronisation being lost. In cows then, we also have seen an increase of AI in cows. Again, we're still only in the last week of February calving. So the one thing I would say is for cows out there that are not bred, synchronize them, fixed time AI. You will get an AI in 10 days. So there will be calving, the first couple of days in March. And that is absolutely key to ensure that we go on as good as we actually started.
And Doreen, as a follow-on, you mentioned that there's an increase in synchronisation in groups of heifers and also the use of sex semen. So with the repeats, there's going to be, I guess, a higher level of repeats than normal. But also the factor is that they're going to all come within a very short space of time, in a space of 3 to 4 days. Is there, merit in going in with a second round of AI as opposed to just leaving in the stock bull with that group of heifers?
Absolutely, Emma. I'd definitely psych myself up if I was a herd owner for a second run of AI, because once the synchronisation and initial AI was done on day one, herd owners left off the bulls, but then I'd pull in those heifers on day 16, 17, I'd put scratch cards on them, and I'd psych myself up for AI for the next 3 or 4 days. I'd remove the bull, depending on the number of heifers, to make sure he wouldn't get injured. So I'd have him when I need him. Because if you take 50 heifers at 80% conception rate, to conventional semen, you end up with 10 empty. If you drop it to 60, you'll end up with over 20 empty, right? So those 4 or 5 days spent heat detecting and the bull out to avoid him getting injury will really, really pay for itself long term, and to ensure that you keep all your benefits of the actual synchronisation, because it's very easy to actually lose that 3 weeks there, especially if the bull is overworked and the bull is young and all the heifers are coming in 3 to 4 days. So it makes the decision very easily to just do it.
And to you, Stuart, if we reflect on the breeding season and the extent of use of AI and the stock bull, this has often been dictated by, improved fertility performance may lead to a reduction in AI, and then changes in market demands and policy, such as the abolition of milk quota led to, an extra use of dairy AI. I guess if you look at the last year or two, can you give us an idea of the typical breeding season in terms of length, and then in terms of, AI straws or stock bull used?
Yeah, well, Emma-Louise, as you said, I suppose when milk quotas went a couple of years ago, there was a drive on, obviously, to increase herd sizes and so forth, and there was a greater focus on dairy AI for longer periods of time to get numbers of heifers on the ground and so forth. But in the last 2 years, I suppose, as we've begun to see things settle down a little bit, I suppose, and we still see growth, but it's at a lower level than it would have been in the previous number of years since the quotas went, and even slightly in advance of the quotas being abolished as well. There's probably a move towards a little bit more beef AI during the course of the early stage of the breeding season as well, but also maybe slightly less dairy AI as well, where people have now reached numbers and are deciding that they have sufficient heifers after a certain number of dairy straws have been used Now, the risk that we run there, of course, is the herd sizes have increased. And in general, when you go around the country and go onto farms, you don't actually see an increase in the number of bulls that have been brought into farms, even where herd sizes have increased. So it's critically important then in that regard that even if we have our dairy AI completed, that we actually continue to AI using beef straws for a number of weeks at least to try and reduce down the workload for that bull. So if we haven't done anything in relation to the numbers of bulls that we're going to have available, and I feel that there's obviously a health and safety risk with high numbers of bulls around the farm. So I think AI offers a huge health and safety incentive in that sense. That by continuing to AI for at least 6 weeks and potentially up to 9 weeks at a very minimum, I think there is the potential to reduce the requirement for a significant number of bulls. And bulls generally tend to be a nuisance on dairy farms because they're only working for maybe 5-6 week period at most, and then you're trying to find a place for them for the rest of the year because they've cost a nice bit of money to bring them in. They're not something that you're going to get rid of very quickly. And from that point of view, I think trying to keep down the numbers of bulls on farm is important. But that means continuing to AI. If you're not going to continue to AI, then you're going to have to increase the number of bulls being brought in. And I think maybe Doreen is going to look at that piece in terms of the numbers of bulls that people are going to require. In terms of the length of the breeding season that you're talking about, I suppose typically we tend to see a 12-13 week breeding season. Probably a lot of people even inclined to let bulls with herds up to 15 weeks. We would be trying to encourage people to be, I suppose, more proactive in the early stages of the breeding season to get more cows and calf as early as possible and reduce down the numbers that are running late into the following spring and almost into the summer in reality when they're not being served until into late July, August. And as a result, just kind of refine the system an awful lot more, make it easier for themselves. I suppose if you're continuing to calve cows while you're trying to breed cows, it actually makes it a rather difficult job to do because you can't focus on both. Whereas where we see the herds that are hitting the 90% calved in 6 weeks, really just about finishing their breeding season in maybe early to mid-July, they may get a week off in between calving and start of AI season, and it helps them to focus a lot more on AI then so that they do get their submission rate right. The conception rate is obviously a function of a lot of other things, but by getting the submission rate right, at least we have that factor covered off. And once we get the other bits to fall into place, we can tighten up the calving pattern, which then leads to that cyclical situation where we calve on time, we breed on time, and we're able to dry off in time, as is the case with a lot of farms where they dry off completely over Christmas anyway.
And like there is that I suppose change of pace that occurs, you know, around calving, and you know things are quietening down. You know, there is a necessity for, I guess, a break for you know, the operator in that scenario as well as the cow, and it also gives farmers the opportunity to take time to put some work into that pre-breeding phase. I guess a follow-on question for you, Stuart, where you would see farmers that are moving in a situation where they're breeding for 12 weeks as opposed to 15 or 16 weeks. In reality, how many cows are you catching, or how many cows are going in calf if you're extending that breeding season by a month?
You're probably talking about a small enough number, really. I suppose a lot will depend on the level of submission rate, and as I said, it's kind of, there's a couple of knock-on effects. If you're still calving cows at the start, submission rate mightn't always be where it should be. We target that's up around 90%, and if we can marry that to a good conception rate of anywhere around the 60% on average, it means that we can get a lot of cows and calf very early on. And if we can maintain that and continue our good heat detection throughout the rest of the breeding season, the numbers that are actually left over for a bull to pick up for those extra 3 weeks wouldn't be quite significant. However, when you're transitioning from a 15-week breeding season, there is a good chance that you're going to have cows that you have to make a decision on, that they just aren't going to be part of the picture for the coming year because they're not going to be calved early on to slot into a 12-week breeding season. And in some cases, people probably just gradually transition back rather than going from 15 weeks to 12 weeks very quickly. They might go from 15 to 14, 13, back to 12 eventually. And some people are actually on 11-week breeding seasons, and I know of a couple of farmers who are actually operating on 9 and 10-week breeding seasons and only have probably 10 to 12% empty at that rate of going, which is excellent performance, to be fair. I suppose the other thing you asked about is in terms of the mix of beef and dairy. And again, Doreen will probably have better figures than I would have in terms of actually seeing what the techs are using. But there's been a big increase in terms of beef AI being used in the first 3 weeks of the year or so of the season. So people are actively making the decisions that they don't want to breed replacements from particular cows, and in order to, I suppose, add a bit of value to them, to the calves, obviously, as opposed to having to have the concern about the Frisian bull versus the Frisian heifer. So the Frisian heifer, the risk is that you keep a bad animal on the farm as part of the next generation, and obviously the Frisian bull has to be sold off the farm, and they're not a very enticing purchase for somebody as it is. So the beef calf obviously has a lot to offer in that sense, and using good beef AI can add value to those kind of animals. So there's been a big shift in particular. There was a nice shift last year, and I think there's been a bigger shift this year towards more beef AI being used in the first 3 to 5 weeks as where we currently stand.
And turning to you then, Doreen, and looking at that, the transition from AI to the stock bull, and I guess there's a few practicalities around that. And often what farmers will say is they found that there was a huge lull, in terms of there was a break in calving for over a week. Can you give us some advice how you could ensure that there's a successful transition from AI to the stock bull?
Yeah, this successful transition is absolutely key. And I suppose the first question we have to ask ourselves is, why do we actually get the lull? And one of the biggest reasons we get the lull is, firstly, herd owners are finding heat detection a little bit difficult before they actually release the bull. Then it takes the bull a period of time to get settled in. And thirdly, a proportion of the stock bulls have much longer gestation lengths than the AI bulls they've been using. So then if we go back to how can we tackle the lull, I think the first thing is before we make the decision to release the bulls is how many empty cows have we actually remaining, because this is the key figure, because it depends on how many empty cows we're remaining. And as Stuart says there, we have some herd owners with just a 9-week breeding. They'll end up with 10 empty cows, but they started from a very compact calving pattern, and they achieved 90% submission rate and 60% conception rate. However, if you take some herds then that are only achieving 70% submission rate, which is the national average, after 6 weeks breeding, they'll have over 33 cows not in calf. So the key thing is how many cows are not in calf are remaining on that farm. And the other point to remember is some herd owners at the start of the year have selected out some cows that they're not going to breed. These actually are putting extra pressure on the bull, as the bull doesn't know that the herd owner doesn't want him to breed those cows. So there is actually extra pressure on the bull. So to avoid a lull is the first thing is trying to get the ratio right, that you keep AI in until such time as you've reduced your empty cows to a point where the bulls can cope. And every 3 weeks AI you reduce the empty rate by half. The second thing then is once the bull is released, keep inseminating for the first 10 to 14 days. That's absolutely key, because it takes the bull time to get settled in and to get into his routine. Any day then to do more than 2 cows in heat, AI as well as using the bull. And we have seen in herds that continue to AI as well as using the bulls, they end up with very, very high in calf rates. Also watch out for synchronized groups, because if you have a synchronized group coming back, it's putting a lot of pressure on the bull. And pressure on the bull results in injured bulls. So that's why it's key to get the ratio right before you start. As if there's too much work there for the bull, he gets injured in his first week or 2, and then he's out for the season. And also make sure that the bull you have left out is actually fertile. So whether he's a young bull or an old bull, make sure he's actually fertility tested. And a young bull, make sure they can actually mate. That is absolutely the key. Make sure they mate. Some people then say the older bull, she was fine last year. The important thing is check, was he fine last year? How many beef calves did you in the first 3 weeks of him being let out? How many beef calves did you in the first 6 weeks of him being let out? How many cows did you cull because they were not in calf? And if you had two bulls of the same breed running with the cows last year, maybe the bull you sold was the more fertile one, and you've actually ended up with the sub-fertile. So there are the couple of things you can do, Emma, to try and avoid the lull.
You've made some really good points there, Doreen. And I guess if we look at submission rate, we will have a very good knowledge of our 3-week submission rate based on our AI records. Conception rate is something that we're going to discover how successful conception rate to first service was. We will see that in the next 1 to 2 weeks based on repeats that we see. And this will give us a good indication as to what the bull needs to attend to in terms of empty cows. I guess just to follow up on a point that you made, cows that you do not want to breed from are going to put extra pressure on the bull. And I guess that's a very fair point, Doreen. But what would you do to eliminate that pressure on the bull?
Yeah, because these cows are actually adding to the empty cows. So the key calculation is how many empty cows have I actually remaining in the herd? And then how many bulls have I to cover those empty cows? And Farm Upstairs calculates exactly for you the amount of empty cows that's left, and it calculates the number of mature bulls that's actually required. However, if you have more empty cows than you have bulls to cover, you have two options. And you're also finding heat detection difficult, because one thing we have to remember is heat detection activity is actually halved. So either change your method of heat detection, completely change the color of paint. So if they're blue paint all along and you now go with pink paint, even if there's blue paint on them not removed, just pretend that's part of the cow and put on pink paint. And if the pink paint is gone, she's in heat, because paint will come off paint much easier. While if you have paint layered on cows at the moment, so I mean, it's not going to come off. The other thing you could do is switch to scratch cards, right? And if that isn't working for you, let off the bulls, but use them as teasers. So you're continuing AIing while the bull is out, because you know your ratio is too big. The risk with that is injury to the bulls.
And for those cows, Doreen, that you don't want to breed from and you don't want to carry them into the next lactation, would you put them in calf, maybe to beef AI, as opposed to leaving them empty and having the bull having to work with them later into the breeding season?
It all depends on your submission rate and your conception rate and how many empty cows you end up with. Like if you have just 5 or 6 of those cows and you've bred for 9 weeks and you've got very good results and you ended up with 10 cows in calf, not in calf that you wanted to breed, adding 5 to that, a mature bull can still cope with. However, if you had achieved the national average submission rate of 70%, so I mean, after 6 weeks, you could be ending up with over 30 cows not in calf, and then adding your 5 cows to that will make the actual difference, right? So you could AI them in the last 3 weeks of the breeding season, or you could use the bull as a teaser and AI the cows then, because if you're culling them at the end of the year, they're only going to be a couple of months in calf at that stage.
And you refer to young bulls and mature bulls, Doreen. Could you remind us of the ratios that you would be matching up for a young bull, I guess, in particular, but what is acceptable in terms of ratios for that younger bull and also a mature bull?
Young bulls and mature bulls are two completely different type bulls, in the sense that with the young bull, we have to make sure he's capable of mating before we actually release him with cows. Because believe it or believe it not, bulls actually have to learn how to mate. And often if a young bull is left off, and the most common case I see is heifers synchronized, got a good conception rate to synchronization, all the repeats are coming in 3 or 4 days, the bull is left out with these bunch of heifers, he does not know how to mate. It could actually take him a week or 10 days to get the hang of it. So essentially you could have lost 3 weeks. So the big thing with the young bull, as well as getting him fertility tested, make sure he knows how to mate. And the easiest way of training him how to mate is put him into a smartle paddock with another animal, and then add a female fully in heat. Watch him mating it. If he doesn't mate it, take her out, add in a second one, and keep with that procedure for a couple of days until such time as the bull can mate quickly and mate comfortably. So that is the first thing to me with young bulls. With older bulls, you're more talking about lameness, which is the biggest issue. with older bulls. Then with younger bulls, once he knows how to mate or which he's left off with the herd, we have to monitor the bulls throughout the breeding season. And the biggest monitoring with the young bull is he suffering too much weight loss? Has he become lethargic? Because that is what you see with young bulls. They get overworked, they lose too much weight, they become lethargic. While the older bulls, do not lose as much weight, they don't become lethargic, but the fact that they're more inclined to become lame. So it's crucial that we actually monitor the bulls throughout the actual breeding season.
And a follow on from that, Doreen, you often see on farms where there's multiple bulls and maybe, that is linked to larger herd size, that there is multiple bulls on the farm and there's some rotation practice that's carried out. Have you any recommendations? Would you switch them one in the morning, one in the evening, or would it be, across every second day? What would you recommend?
Depending on the farm and depending on how many bulls, I'd work them in groups. If a farm had 4 bulls, you could work them in 2 by 2, and you could work them 24 hours on, 24 hours off. And the advantage of the 24 hours off is the bull gets time to rest, and the bull actually needs to be fed. But when he's resting, he's lying down inside in a good straw bed, and he's being fed every day. He's not running up and down inside the wire as the cows are going in and out. And the big advantage of 24 hours on and 24 hours off, as well as the bull actually being rested and actually getting fed, which really works well for young bulls, because it avoids the weight loss that leads to that lethargic bull later on in the season. The other thing it does is, Emma, is a dominant bull, if there are 2 cows in heat, he'll protect those 2 cows for himself, and he will not allow another bull to mate him. And if that dominant bull is subfertile, you have a real issue then. So that was sort of 24 hours on, 24 hours off works reasonably well. Equally, you could work it, 12 hours on, 12 hours off, but that's a little bit more work. So what you're really worried about is the dominant subfertile bull, right? And also by rotating bulls 24 hours on, 24 hours off, you have less wasted matings. And it's a system that works quite well. In larger herds, the other issue then you have is long walks, and roadways kill bulls, because when they come off the cow after mating, coming right down the road, all the weight is coming down their front legs. You get those nasty drops, in bulls there in the front legs. So one way of avoiding the long walks is, especially if, is try and keep the bulls in the paddocks and actually feed them in the paddocks.
Stuart, turning to you then in terms of the practicalities of ensuring the bull is, fit for the breeding season. Bulls now are on the ground, or they are going to be delivered soon to dairy farms, for the start of the second half of the breeding season. Would you recommend that farmers would complete an MOT ahead of the breeding?
Yeah, sure. Doreen has covered a lot of it there, I suppose, in terms of what it can impact on the bull, I suppose, Emma-Louise. And in reality, their feet is one of the biggest challenges that they have. And then the other thing that doesn't affect an AI technician is that any sort of a cause of an increase in temperature in the bull can actually render them subfertile. So I suppose from the point of view of on a given day, if you want to guarantee the fertility of the bull, it's possibly worth fertility testing them in advance of when they go in with the cows. However, as I said, that is only as good as the day it's taken. So if the bull does encounter some sort of a source of infection and gets a high temperature in the intervening time, he could be rendered subfertile by that infection. So people need to bear that in mind. And as I said, I think in spite of whether an AI technician has a high temperature or not, they'll generally still probably achieve the same conception rate that they will have had earlier in the season. So from that point of view, I think it's good to continue to AI along with the bulls anyway, even right through to the end of the season as an insurance policy to cover any drops in fertility that can happen in the bull. And as Doreen said there, if they're worked very hard, or if they go through a period where they're very busy, they might still be jumping on cows, but they may not actually be putting them in calf. So from that point of view, I think it's worth, I suppose, just having that insurance policy in place as well. In terms of the MOT piece, I think the cows that Doreen has talked about there, where you don't want to breed them, it's probably no harm if it's feasible. It may not always be feasible to draft out those cows when they do come bulling, and as Doreen said, maybe put them into a small paddock with the bull just to see, can he serve her? Is he still capable of serving her? And by doing that early in the breeding season, so like we'll say this week now, obviously for people, because it's a couple of weeks past already, you could do that this week if the opportunity came. And obviously in a couple of weeks' time, then if that cow is repeating, now you'd have to do it more than one cow, obviously, because they're not going to put them all in calf in one go. But you get a kind of a feel for how they're performing. But obviously the fertility test done by the vet is going to tell you there and then that they are fertile. But just to be conscious that they can go subfertile during the course of the breeding season. So that MOT that is done by your vet, while it's effective at the time that it's done, 2 to 3 weeks later, when the bull has, like Doreen says, has picked up a small drop in his foot and is beginning to go lame, he isn't actually very noticeably lame just at that time maybe, but he can have a raised temperature at that point of time, and his fertility can be impacted on by that. So it's just to be conscious of it. Like Doreen said, maybe trying to reduce the workload that they have, reduce the number of times that they're walking in and out. It's a bit of a challenge to keep a bull in a paddock, especially if there's cows bulling, obviously, so people need to be cautious with that as well. But even just to feed them if they do come in, I know people complain about bulls coming into the parlour, but if they get into the habit of maybe getting a small bit of feeding when they come into the yard, they may stay out of the parlour then, and they'll actively move to get fed when they enter the yard, so people can manage them a bit better in that sense. So yes, there is merit in that MOT, but just to be conscious that it's not a guarantee that he's going to be effective throughout the season, and that continuing AI is a really, really cheap insurance policy to insure against having empty cows by default, by a fault of a bull, basically.
And to play devil's advocate to you, Stuart, you've mentioned a few things, the health and safety risk of a bull. A bull works for 5 to 6 weeks on a farm, which is 10% of the year, and you have to look after it for the other 90% of the year too. And also then you've a recommendation as an insurance policy to continue to AI while the bull is in. So is there opportunity on farms to go fully AI for the breeding season, and to eliminate all of those factors that you've mentioned from using the stock bull for 3 to 6 weeks?
Yeah, look, without doubt, there are a good number of farms out there already that are going 100% AI. However, the challenge is for them, like Doreen has already said there, is that heat detection can become difficult. So I suppose where there are some people who have automated heat detection systems now that are helping them to spot those cows that would be more difficult to detect in more conventional systems. But I suppose if you can keep your focus on heat detection, there's probably no reason that ordinary heat detection methods can't be used, or the other alternative would be potentially it goes against the health and safety element of having the bull on the farm. But a vasectomized bull can actually help to pick up those heats, and because he's only maybe a strong weanling that you've kept, you're willing to part company with him at the end of the season. So I see more people beginning to move in that direction, where they keep a weanling for the year, maybe running with calves anyway, and they only have to be separated late in the season. And then they're vasectomizing those. They're using them as a heat detection method, and once their breeding season is finished, they might be put into a shed for a couple of weeks to be pushed on and moved off the farm, basically. Or in some cases, people are selling them on to later season, we'll say later breeding season farms, to continue their work on those farms at that stage. Again, now there's disease concerns around the likes of that as well, obviously. But yeah, there is scope. I suppose the advantage of going 100% AI is the opportunity that it offers in terms of a range of different bulls. And I know Doreen is very strong on the options of maybe using those slightly harder calving. And if you could see me, I'm doing my inverted commas around harder calving, in that they're not harder calving, but they're being used on mature cows, as opposed to using an easy calving bull on first calvers, second calvers, and cows that could take a little bit more in terms of a calving difficulty, and not actually cost them a thought in terms of calving that animal subsequently. So the AI, continuing with AI, offers huge opportunity in terms of really improving the quality of the beef from the dairy herd, as opposed to maybe just rely, like I suppose there's a lot of herds that focused on easy calving in terms of sales of bulls and so forth, and that's their modus operandi, and people are buying for easy calving, but that means that they're very easy calving for all animals in the herd, and like you're not having to compromise calving ease by using some of those higher calving difficulty animals on stronger or bulls on more mature cows within the herd. So I think AI has a huge role to play. I suppose the downside of it is that obviously we have a family farm operation in Ireland in the main, and people need a bit of time off. So the bull actually kind of facilitates that. He's doing the job all the time. He's there 24 hours a day. He's picking up a share of these cows. I know that every farmer in the country would probably say that there are cows in calf at the end of the season that they've never seen potentially bulling. Now, whether that's a reflection of not following through in terms of the heat detection aids throughout the season, or whether it's just that the bull constantly only works by night and people don't see them, it's up for other people to judge. But I suppose just we probably run out of, we put a lot of effort into the first 3 weeks of AI, a lesser effort maybe into the second 3 weeks, and then it definitely wanes quite significantly from then on. So I suppose unless you're really committed to sticking with AI, the bull still has a role to play on the farm. And long term, I suppose, in terms of just from the health and safety element of it, just trying to keep the numbers of bulls down, I would say that people should try to AI for a longer period to reduce the sheer numbers of bulls to be carried on the farm. And then it's just ultimately down to a personal choice at that stage, then whether people want to, like some people have had frights from bulls and they don't want them around anymore, and they're gone 100% AI for that reason. As I said, the scope is fantastic with them, but it is going to be a personal choice whether people want to do it or not. And I think maybe give it 5-10 years as the cost of the likes of the automated heat detection system technology will reduce. I would expect in the next number of years, you might see less and less bulls on farms as a result of that, because the heat detection will, in theory, become easier, because again, there's that 24/7 observation happening with the detection systems. So I don't know if Doreen wants to make a comment on that. Maybe I'm sure she has some opinions in that idea, in that regard.
Yeah, I think, you know, I mean, as Stuart says there, people after 6 and 9 weeks AI want to take a break, so they want the bull to work. So the big thing is like the start of the season, the bull's work is front loaded into the first 2 or 3 weeks when he goes out. So avoiding the lull AI when he's out at that point, that's crucial. The second point is getting both young and mature bulls fertility tested before they go to work. However, monitor them throughout the season. And if any of them have a bout of lameness, get injured, run a high temperature, or a young bull loses weight and gets lethargic, definitely get them fertility tested again to make sure, you know, I mean, that there is not an issue. And if you take a simple thing like photosynthesization, that can knock out a bull for about 3 to 4 months. Then the beef panels we have for dairy AI, and the bulls we have in it, we're very conservative with the calving. I mean, so you can be really confident of security of the calving, short gestation, and you have carcass values there going from 6 to 13 kilos in Angus's, do you know what I mean, up to 20 kilos in the limousines and the blues, do you know what I mean, and the Herefords, do you know what I mean, they're in between. And there in the beef of the dairy panel, it's clearly laid out what's suitable for heifers, what's suitable for second calvers, cows and mature cows. And if you use that, you should have no difficult calving, because we are quite conservative, do you know what I mean, with those panels. Because the big thing what we have to do is to add value to the calf crop and to make sure that the guy that buys those calves, he can actually make some money out of them.
I suppose, Doreen, and one thing that we probably neither of us have mentioned is that the gestation length of those AI bulls is a significant factor in terms of the farmer's point of view, isn't it? That they're going to calve on time generally, I suppose, with the exception of the limousines. To be fair, they probably do carry it a bit, but your Belgian Blues, your Hereford panel is nearly all negative, I think, and all your Anguses are short gestation as well. So they actually will gain a bit of time in next year's calving season for farmers as well by continuing to use them rather than letting off a stock bull, which you won't have a real indicator for as to what their gestation length is going to be, really.
Absolutely, Stuart, and that's one of the reasons for the lull as well. As if you take the Anguses there, we have some Anguses there at -4 in gestation, on the PTA, that'll actually convert nearly into 8 days, do you know what I mean, on the ground. The panel of heifers there is absolutely superb, because it's the only place you'll find so many bulls positive in carcass conformation and weight and negative on gestation. Do you know what I mean? So the gestation is crucial.
And I think that gives farmers a lot of confidence when you talk about you're conservative in terms of the calving difficulty, and to ensure that doesn't become an issue on dairy farms. And also then the second primary concern that you would see with farmers is the gestation length, and you're answering that concern too. I think across the board we've had quite a solid discussion this morning. I think it gives farmers a lot of information and a lot of reminders as to making sure that the transition from the AI to the stock bull is done successfully and efficiently, and you're not experiencing that lull. And secondly, then what to look out for when the bull is in. I think points that the two of you have touched on in terms of monitoring the bull. So we're not just monitoring the cows for the heat detection, we're also monitoring the progress of the bull in terms of weight loss in the younger bulls, and also lameness across the board. And where there is issues from this, there can be subfertility, and that will invariably lead to empty cows. Thank you, Doreen and Stuart.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Emma-Louise.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Doreen Corridan and Stuart Childs for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify, and for more information go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.